of potholes. It teaches you the value of twists and turns and how to deal with the VUCA world. And it's a very fascinating place. I think MBA probably here has a very different acronym. I think it's in Masters in Bumpy Adventures for a city like Bangalore. So every day, I live in South Bangalore, there's metro construction happening right on that road. Every day that I commute, I take one brick and keep it, hoping that it'll expedite the metro construction so that the next generation can use the metro, right? So, so what I really thought was, my whole belief is the universe is filled with stories. Stories are really fascinating. And I thought, in a very humble way, I'll share a bit of story of what we're experimenting with Amagi. And, like in Panchatantra tales, at the end of the story, we'll have, what did we learn from it? What are the perspectives that we gathered? So I'll probably leave that with a thought. I started my career, of course, I started my career a long time ago. I'm a prehistoric beast in this industry, worked for about 25 years. But I'm an engineer with no qualification in HR, so I hoodwinked the industry and got away with it for 2 good decades, doing the Howney Act. And, but as an engineer, one thing I've always learned is, from all the creative thinking, where the rubber meets the road, what will work? And through, staying curious, because I didn't have a foundation into formal degrees and learning, so I had to ask, probe. That's one trait that I still hold good to my heart. That's got me here, and that's one dear trait that I try to hold on as much as possible. So let me give you a little bit of perspective. I'm sure many of you wouldn't have heard about Amagi. Most of you. It's not a pizza company. So Amagi is actually, it's not a surprise, but we're a very introverted organization. We got to change that. But what Amagi does as a context is, we are into vertical SaaS, B2B business, make an impact in the media tech space. It's an organization that started in India about 16 years ago. Media, as you all know, has always stayed in the past. And entertainment media, for example, during the COVID time, what are some of the industries that continue to stay and thrive? Media would definitely be one of them. And media is an industry that will be there around for a long time. But at the same time, media does have a lot of characters about that as an industry itself. Like if you have great acting skills, doesn't mean that you can crack Bollywood and Hollywood. So 16 years ago, imagine that the 3 founders of the company, Srini, Vidya, and Bhaskar, this is their 3rd venture. They thought that the future of media technology will belong to the connected world, and decided to build cloud-based solutions for the media tech industry, way ahead of its time and thinking for that point. And the North Star for media as an industry in the world is the US market. And for a company that started its origin here, today we're a global company. We have more than 30 different nationalities. 80% of our market is in the US, another 15% in Europe, and less than 1% is rest of the world. What we do is we are in the intersection between broadcasters. What you see typically with media, all the heavy equipments. It's a very equipment heavy, very expensive. Broadcasting is a heavily expensive business. So we help broadcasters go on the cloud and do it at about 1/10 of the cost. So that's what we do. So one end is the broadcasters. On the other end, we have content providers. Let's say that we all got together and produced this lovely movie of this day. What you really want to do is distribute this content as wide as possible. So they come to Amagi. We basically help them distribute their content beyond the YouTube, beyond the Amazon Prime. So interestingly, platforms require content, and content requires platform. And we do it for them. So for example, Discovery would come and tell, they have content for like the Avengers series or whatever it is. They have it for whatever they have for so many years. They will say, look, we sign up the deal with, let's say, a Roku, which is a platform, and all the channels will actually be broadcast, monetized, analytics brought back. That will be done by Amagi. So we are in the intersection between these 2 players. Interestingly, we also do the 3rd set of customers for us is advertisers. We do programmatic advertising, like in TV, when you watch, there is advertising. So we are actually in the three-phased market between broadcasters, content creators, and platforms. That's what Amagi does. We host about 5,000 plus channels today. And we are, luckily for us, we are not a very headcount intensive organization. And even if we grow, we won't be very headcount intensive. That's a good thing. I like beauty in small things. I've always consciously stayed away from very large organizations. I've joined organizations that are sub 1,000 and been a part of the growth, although I have my colleagues who have always worked in large organizations and I respect them, but it's just that it's me. Good or bad of what you do, when you see it, it's very, very gratifying. So though we are only 850 people, we are very complex. I started about telling that we are about 30 nationalities. We work across time zones, and large model is bulk of all the product that we built is built in India. But we also have a beautiful center of excellence emerging in Eastern Europe, both in Poland and Croatia. Media tech is a very, very niche area. So you do have a lot of developers in the Eastern Europe region, and we have two beautiful centers that are emerging there, which each of them have two fully owned products. So that's the dispersion. So what is really the problem statement? So what I really want to highlight here is a unique problem statement that all of us will have in our business. How do you deduce this? How do you approach a solution? And how do you go about experimenting something beyond the confines of the normal? So, and the subject is a very dear subject, right? Culture. And I do believe for all of us, culture is there, but culture is also sometimes very esoteric. We don't kind of relate to it. And how do you really quantify it? How do you bring it down? So when we started, just to give you a context, Amagi stands for freedom in Sumerian. In Sumerian, if you go back to the history, in those times, how debts used to be settled is when somebody had a debt, their family member will be working for the person. And once the debt is settled, they say that go back to your mother. In Sumerian, Amagi actually means go back to your mother. So it means that your debt is settled. It means freedom. So the first thing, even when I explored the opportunity with Amagi, what intrigued me was most of the organizations are in belief systems of empowerment. But here is an organization that believed that our tenets has to be on tenets of freedom. So for example, we don't have a declared HQ. Though we do acquisitions, we don't go about, we say our first principles are autonomy. Information has to pass up and down. So if we travel, all of us travel the same way. So we practice it. However, we have our own challenges, right? If you see this CTC, what does CTC stand for? Cost to company. This is a different CTC, by the way. This is crossing the chasm. And that was the whole problem with us. People understood this culture when we were about 50 people. People understood our culture when we were about 100, but it started straining at that point of time. Most of the growth that Amagi had, really 10x of the growth, happened during the COVID period. We rapidly grew. And we were very clear that if you have to build an institution, which is the foundational principle of what we're trying to do, this is a 30, 40-year institution. That's the belief systems that we are carrying, though we are a startup. That how do you really translate our unique DNA into a scalable fashion? So sometimes scale is not about doing things at scale. Sometimes the biggest challenge with scale is how do you scale what works? It works today. It worked when there are 50 people. But how do you scale when you're 850 people? You are practically in so many countries. You open another office in another country with a bunch of people out there. How do you really come together as one? It's a huge challenge. And you're also working in an industry and a niche where we have, for example, 5-day work in Bangalore office. Every day, 550 people come to our place. When we opened office post-COVID, surprisingly, 200 people turned out. We actually ran out of real estate space. And slowly that numbers inorganically. So Friday evenings at Amagi don't look like Friday evenings in most other places. There is intensity. Because what we're trying to do here is also things that might not have been done in the past. So there is no ready expertise or domain knowledge that you get from the industry. So the need for collaboration is a big challenge. So this is like a typical product life cycle. Every product It's the same thing with your culture life cycle as well. So the challenge for us was, if we have to build a long-term institution, how can we have our own unique cultural DNA percolate, and ultimately the success is when every Amagian can live and breathe this culture. So scale sometimes is the biggest problem. Don't tell me I have an answer. I don't have an answer. I only have experiments and discovery, and I'm going to share just the perspective. I'm nowhere close to coming to tell you that, we have tasted success, but we are making progress is all I can say. So I think the first thing to start is to intently listen and understand your problem statements. And what were our own unique problem statements? I've alluded to some of this, right? We had a global dispersion. We are spread across the globe. There are time zone complexities. There is no time zone. You can have a meeting where somebody will be in an odd time. We generally now sign up and say that if you aspire to do a global role, you have to be available globally. But it's still a difficult challenge when you work across time zones. We also have absolutely grown through acquisitions as well. It's a very integral part. So how do you really acquire, at the same time ensure that you feel together as one? Because they are bringing in their own value systems. How do you really bring this together as one? What can be the common language for us to belong together, which is very important for us. Most importantly for us, with about 850 people, I need to know, how does Amanda in Australia wake up today and feel? I need to know how Karen in Israel is feeling today. It is a process of continuous listening. So obviously, some of the ways of annual surveys or quarterly surveys are not relevant for us. So how do you really put a mechanism as you start scaling now? How do you build a continuous listening mechanism into the organization? Obviously, we are 30 plus nationalities and it's only increasing. How do you really bring this whole beautiful tapestry of diversity together and build this one inclusive culture in the organization? So there are problem statements, and then there are aspirations also. In October 2022, we said that we want to be the happiest workplace in the world. People should come, they should love what they're doing. What they're doing is creating a change to the industry. They should love the people that they work with, and they find a purpose larger than themselves in bringing themselves every day in doing what they're doing. So we said that we have to build the happiest workplace. Easier said than done. The question is, how is Amagi going to journey? Because happiness is an emotion. How is Amagi going to journey in this emotion of happiness with our people? I told you that we had a distinct DNA. How do you preserve and build on this distinct DNA? Ultimately build a world-class media tech organization on foundation of goodness. Most of the other organizations, when you go global, you say, this is the HQ, probably everybody else align. Our way of approaching this is very different. We don't have, like I said, a declared HQ. Our thinking is very different. There's humility just out there. There is vulnerability celebrated here. So how do you really, carve out your own distinct DNA? Of course, high performance. I think cultural disintermediation is it is not top-driven alone for us. It's very important that all bottlenecks to culture can be removed. It is seamless. People can have different interpretation of what we call as the Amagi way in different places. Poland can, for example, the culture is so different out there. There is an overarching theme of the Amagi way, but the interpretation of how it is practiced or interpreted can have its own beautiful flavors in different regions, in different places. So how do you really bring this cultural disintermediation? And our whole model is also a very servant leadership model. We say that nobody's knighted out here. I'm sure all our organizations are probably rooted in that. But we have our own Bible. We say as a leader, you have to be the last person speaking in a meeting. You have to listen. It's about integrative thinking that you celebrate as a leader. So how do you conjoin and bring a khichdi of sometimes opposing emotions and views, and then have a happy outcome when you leave that meeting? Big development area for me in listening and talking. You can see kind of person that I am. You would have noticed. My team usually gives me, so it's still a developmental area, but ultimately, if you look at this, our problem statements and our aspirations, when you have to carve a solution, sometimes you don't want to look at this linearly. You want to carve a solution that can help actually address many of these things while doing one thing. So that's a better, smart way of how you want to approach. So what did we really do? So what we really did was we went back to our roots. What Amagians know and what we have really done well, we call this inside the organization as a timeless engine. What really has got us here is the ability to listen very intently to our customers, synthesize their needs, form a solution. Mostly we take up challenges which other people think are impossible to do. We try to take those challenges with a can-do positive attitude, support the customer, and go back to the listening. So this is something that everybody understands. This has been fundamental in the evolution of the organization thus far. So we said that the way we look at our people as well cannot be any different. How do we therefore listen intently to Amagians in a continuous mechanism, synthesize their needs, then you innovate and implement whatever is the issue. It could be an issue, but when you synthesize that need, you have an org level trends that you see or team level trends that you see. How do you synthesize it and then deploy solutions to address it at the local area, go enable and support it and see how it is working and go back to the listening cycle. So what we really did, and I'll share a bit of glimpse in terms of, and I'm happy to have corridor conversations, but I'll share a little glimpse that we had a new exec member on board, the chief listening officer, and this was actually a AI bot which was placed in our all hands meeting, was introduced as an exec team member. So today across the organization, just to give you a little bit of what has gone into the design, there are two elements to it. One is, see, we can sign up for technology. Technology can move mountains, but it's very important to see how you plan and deploy it. So there are two parts to this. One is the right-brained part, and the other is your practice, your creative side, your right brain and your left brain. Both are important, and you break that down to why, what, and how. So for example, and I'll tell you typically that the AI bot today, as we all know, and the little demo that we had, it has amazing ability where human-machine interactions happen today. It can be really conversational in nature. But not only that, it can analyze your sentiment and automatically deduce your next question as the one to go deeper in a conversational tone. And at the background, it does analytics to see your mood, how happy you are, but also deducing parameters of which are some of the areas of concern. And every single conversation that we have, it's a continuous conversation. I'll tell you how it is deployed. Comes back, Bhaskar is the CEO, and me. So we have uncluttered. So we took a decision that it will not be anonymous. It is confidential and it is not anonymous. The reason that we said it will be confidential and not, again, a very bold step, because we said that it is not enough for us to listen. If somebody has a particular issue or a problem, it is important for us to solve it. Listening can only do to that extent. But if there is no action towards that, then that problem is festering. So if you have to do that, we need to know who has that issue. And our commitment is no issue in the organization is big or small. There is no retribution. There is no backlash. So it also kind of mirrors of what we preach as a culture within the organization. So that's a very big change that we took. So there is freedom of voice, breaking down silos. And what we typically did is, if you see, this was deployed, I'm just giving glimpses, this was deployed where when people complete their milestones, day 1, 15 days, 30 days, 90 days, 1 year anniversary, 2 year anniversary. Just last week, Amagi completed incredible journey of 16 years, but we also had people who have completed 15 years, 10 years, and 5 years in the company, right? So there is a continuous listening that actually the Amber goes, our CLO goes, interacts on behalf of Bhaskar and me with every single Amagian in the organization. And those conversations, every day in the morning, both Bhaskar and I go to every single conversation, and wherever we see there is an issue or an area, we intervene and the partners intervene. This is just to give you a little bit of glimpse of how it is integrated into our system. We use Slack and email. Both are platforms that we use extensively internally to communicate. So these are actually integrated into the platform. And this is typically how the reach out happens. So when somebody, for example, completes a milestone, there is a video, it encourages them, it tells them, it wishes them on that milestone, and then you can see that the conversation begins. This is just to give you a little bit of how the chatbot goes and has the conversation there. Behind the scene, we have mapped that to about 7 driver elements, and every quarter, what we also do is we do a reach out from Amber on a quarter. It's a 30-second interaction, not more than that, on a theme that we want to deduce. So for example, one of the areas that we did was beyond all hands, we're quite transparent in sharing all our goals and numbers. So we share that in all hands. But one of the feedback that came back to us, for example, is, hey, we don't know, there is not enough clarity in terms of what are all the things that we are building and how my objectives are actually linking to what we are taken up as an organization. So what we really did was we did multiple workshops. We call it as the AFA goals, Amagi focus areas. We completed about 22 workshops. And after completing in the quarter, we just went and then we in that particular reach out from Amber, we asked questions that, do you have clarity? Do you know how your work, or what are the bottlenecks that are coming in your way? Do you have the resources? What we get from here, the perspectives are immense. We launched it in January and we had 510 conversations as of October end that was completed in the organization. What do you get? You get what we call as PTM, people to meet. So we have the AI bot is able to throw up who are people at risk for you. There's a risk index score that we have actually arrived at, and it will throw up as amber or green. Green is a promoter, red is usually a risk index. So everybody on a risk index, there is a metric that we are running. It is people to meet, it's called as. So every single person you need to meet. This actually is very powerful even in productivity. Think about us. We have a global organization. If I ask my partner, even if they're handling about 300 people, there is no partner who can have 300 conversations in a quarter with people. And these conversations and mood are anyway changing. But today with the tool, they're able to direct and understand where to have the conversation, what is the pattern, and then go and have that conversation with that individual, right? So we have people to meet. We're able to deduce people at risk. We had 12 cases, actually 40 cases of people to meet, which means they were in the risk. So these are preempting much before a person crosses the bridge and submits their resignation. When issues surface, when you're able to address that issue at a nip and you're able to nip it at the bud, then you have the best outcome. It is quite late sometimes when somebody has crossed the bridge and submitted their resignation. We get to know at the organization level what is working well, what is not working well. We can break that down to region, country, teams. We know at a manager level what is happening. We also know who are our promoters, because when you want to build the happiest workplace, it's not enough to just look at what is not working and all the sad things and all the critical things. It's very important to also know that happiness is an energy. You got to know who are your lighthouses in the organization. How can they mentor and guide somebody else to navigate in the organization, because we're still in a startup. We don't have all the processes and systems that are set up. And you can also deduce and see from here who are your silent folks, the quiet folks who are not having conversation. Sometimes it's not the people who are vocal that matters. The more people at risk are people who are quiet. You've heard about that quiet resignation and all that, right? You're able to reduce that and then see, okay, you classify talent as your high potential, your critical talent, your solid state. Then you also know there are issues. There are people who have developmental areas and they are not necessarily going to be in a happy state. But if they are high potential and critical people and they're quiet, it should bother you. And you should not delay for more than even 24 hours in not having that interaction with that individual. Plus, you will have an insight about what is not working with them ahead of that conversation. So you can actually go into that conversation meaningfully. And we have an SLA. Every single people to meet, you have to close within 15 days. What does closure mean? It doesn't mean a happy answer for that person. Step one is to listen. Sometimes you have to coach the individual. Sometimes there's an issue between the individual and the manager, for example, and then you do an intervention. You make a commitment, but you have to go to the system, and then you have to close that. It's like emotional ticketing system that we have set up, but to ensure that every voice is heard and resolved, and there's a resolution that comes from us, and that's a metric that we track. I'm just sharing with you the dashboard in an as-is way that we have. So for example, you can see if you say you want to be the happiest workplace in the world, you have to have a system that measure then happiness. So that's called as our mood score. Then, of course, we track our ENPS. It's a scale of 10, and we take 9 and 10 as the promoter score. Up to 6 is a detractor score. The other is passive. And we have engagement. That engagement is a tried matrix of 3 things. 7 drivers are there, but largely they are between your work, your management chain, and the people that you work with, and the environment that you work with, and the culture that you work with. So those are the scores that we have, and you can see here typically that we have about 48 PTM cases since January that we discovered, 40 cases that were solved. 15 days is our time. We are averaging about 21 days, a little more than 15 days. We have room to improve there, but yet I know from industry standard that this is still not bad, but we are striving hard to bring it within that 15 odd days. So for us, it is very important that in our industry of media tech, every single person here is a person who can walk away with 3 to 4 jobs in their hand. If they are going to stay with you, they are only going to stay with you because they are heard, they are valued, and the belief systems are all aligning to what we say, what we preach, and what we do. The day we mess that, we know very clearly that we'll probably have an exodus of people. So when you scale, sometimes it's a challenge, therefore. It's a scary place. So with this, we are able to also, we have seen that vulnerability, for example. In fact, one of our Amagi way is be vulnerable, be you. That's one of our values. So we celebrate vulnerability. It's okay in our place to say, I don't know. It's okay in our place to say, I don't know how to do this. I messed this up. It is fine. No, you're not going to get crucified here when you say you messed up something. It is very important I feel that vulnerability builds authenticity and it helps to build culture. So this is a very powerful force in terms of bringing people together in how you're able to preserve and build on your culture, but with actionable intentions, where we are giving freedom of speech to everybody, where there is no retribution, where we go and address every single issue and every single metric is published. The broader metric. Of course, confidentiality and all those sensitivities are maintained. But at the same time, and managers, and I'm seeing a world, we started the first year, and hopefully by year 3, I think it will mature where every manager can have this dashboard, and every team member in our organization can have the freedom to tell whatever they want, unafraid of their manager. The matter that matters most is what is the issue, how can we solve it? It doesn't matter who's bearing that issue or who's the cause of the issue, including the manager, right? We're slightly far away from that world. It requires maturity even for us, but this is a year 1 journey that we've had. But when you do that, it is able to bring about the best in our people. That's our belief system. And when you take that as a collective cohort, when it becomes a force multiplier, people coming together, for us, the strength is in the diversity. Why did we start Poland and Croatia? We'll announce another acquisition next week. It is very important because our next idea of what we want to do is going to come not just from one single pool of how we have looked at the problem. It's going to come from new places, new perspectives. It is going to come from that listening by the salesperson with the customer in what their problems are. Next big product lies there. The next big innovation lies there. In a very humbling way, just sharing the stats with you, right? The last Olympics was live cast to the world by Amagi. 17 hours, 17 days of the largest event in the largest stage with completely on cloud, because these were all traditionally done using hardware, completely on the cloud with low latency, with a 10-channel Dolby Atmos, and we didn't have a glitch those 17 days. Those 17 days, we were crossing our fingers. But that's the power of what, culture can do to bring, and this was not done, this is done by a huge cohort of global teams working together with a single mission, with a single purpose. Right? It's also humbling that if you look at just this last year, most of the coveted places in the tech and product, we were recognized. The biggest, I think, is the Emmy Awards. I'm sure many of you know the Emmy Awards. The Emmy Awards is considered like the Oscars for tech. And this is the second consecutive year that Amagians won the Emmy Award for their work in innovation. So that's a little story, but we also have that whole perspective on Panchatantra, right? And what I want to leave some thoughts with you. I think the first thing is deep listening is very, very important. Culture, I think, is built with very, very deep understanding of what is the issue, what are the contexts. Every place, every team has their own fabric. It's very, very important, first of all, before we start anything, to build a very, very deep understanding. You remember the problem statements and aspiration. When you start writing down and deducing it, and you start listening very intently, what to solve for, your answer first comes from that listening. So very important. For me, for example, this is a big feedback area. From my long many years, I'm a very excitable person. I get feedback from home mostly. Your wife, your daughter, they all give you feedback on your listening ability. I'm very conscious about it. Right? I can only tell you I've only improved. I'm a better version of myself. And as long as I'm humbled, but I'm still a long way to go from my own listening ability. But I have other people in my team who are better listeners, and I bank on them. And usually, I'm at fault, but together as a team, we cover up for some of the gaps I have as an individual, as a person. Right? But listening is a very important area. And when used in learning, in context, your ability to use listening and to make real impact in your business problems or in more complex areas like culture building that has to sustain a long-term future, it has a huge role to play in learning. The second definitely is, listening alone, like I said, is not enough. How do you really bring that into actionable? And when you do both and you do that with empathy, listening is a very beautiful thing because the first thing it does when you listen authentically is it builds empathy, which is the foundation to build trust. Right? So just the act of listening to any human being is a foundation to building trust. So we are able to build then trust and relationships in the organization. So similarly here, when we do learning interventions, I think how you take the feedback loop matters. When we say, for example, I gave the session, give me the feedback right there. Or you want to listen to what could the session do differently? What perspectives I could have shared? Then you need to intend. You're not trying to listen for an intended outcome that you want. Your way of how you want to solve things are going to come from you actually humbly going and listening and saying what could be done better. Right? Last, I think it's very important that technology and design thinking, we've used both of this. It has tremendous power to move mountains for us. For us, with the AI capabilities, not only we are inducing that into the product, to the earlier conversation here, if you want to build, this is the world that we are getting into. You have to build an organization which is an AI embracing ready culture. So your culture also has to use tenets and elements in a structured way where you're able to make this bold experiments and show people that, this is the way, let's test it out. Let's see, let's learn from each other, right? Last but not the least, I said that I think the biggest strength for us is the vulnerability. In learning especially, if we can teach courage in the organization, we can teach authenticity in the organization, it's a very, very powerful force in what you can discover and the deep connections you can actually make and some of the best creative thinking and impact that you can create. So thank you so much for your patient listening, and I hope this was just a share to give you some kind of perspectives of a problem statement unique to us, but the matter for me to share with you is, how do you approach it? What are some of the lessons we learned, whereas we are still in the journey. But for today, I leave these thoughts with you. Thank you.